If you're anything like me, you're probably really tired of seeing almost as many ads or more ads online than the actual content you're looking for. The internet has gotten to be a more difficult place to navigate without having targeted ads shoved down your throat, but today we're going to be looking at a solution to manage that a little bit better. This solution is called Pi-hole. If you've been around the self-hosting scene at all, it's probably pretty likely that you've heard of Pi-hole. What it is something called a DNS black hole or sinkhole that will block ads across your entire network. That way you don't have to worry about installing browser extensions to get rid of ads or doing other things like that. Pi-hole also has the benefit of working on devices that don't have browsers, so you can't put extensions on them. It will limit ads in things like mobile games and other sources like that. If you're already familiar with what Pi-hole is, or you don't really care to know what it is and just want it to work, go ahead and skip to the timestamp on screen now to get into the setup for Pi-hole on Unraid. If you're curious about how Pi-hole works, then tune in right now. So since I don't know how to do fancy animations or any of that stuff yet, I'm gonna use a whiteboard. Pi-hole is a DNS black hole, like I mentioned earlier. But in order to understand what that means, we need to understand what DNS is. DNS stands for Domain Name Service, and this is a super simplified version of how it works. You have a client or a host computer, and in a browser, something like that, you might search for a human readable web address. Take www.google.com, for example. And what DNS does, or rather what your computer does, is it sends a request to a DNS server, and your computer says, hey, I'm looking for the IP address for google.com. The DNS server does a whole bunch of stuff and then returns what the IP address is for whatever your request was back to your computer. So in this case, if you're looking for google.com, you might get 8.8.8.8 back. Now this 8.8.8.8 is the IP address for this website. So then machines can use this address to return the actual information and content on the page that you want. So once your host computer gets this IP address, then it sends that IP address out to the web server where that information is stored. And then that web server says, yep, that's the IP address for this content. And it sends the content for that website back to the client computer so that you can view it. Usually this process happens really, really fast. That's how DNS works in a basic way. What Pi-hole does is it sits here and acts as a DNS server, and it has a whole long list of blacklisted IP addresses that are known to be associated with tracking websites and ad websites so that those domains can't resolve. So what happens is if you access a web page that has a bunch of ads on it, those ads will make DNS requests to try to resolve or get that content on your computer. But Pi-hole will say, hey, I know that this IP address is associated with a tracking website or an ad website, so I'm not going to return the proper address so that it can't resolve. So that's why Pi-hole works across your entire network, is because it blocks IP addresses from known bad actors or ad/tracking websites from resolving so that you just don't end up seeing that content. So that's the super basics of how Pi-hole works. And now we're gonna get a little bit more into actually how to get it set up. Before we get too far into the setup, it is worth noting that there are a few exceptions that Pi-hole won't block ads for. For example, services like Netflix and YouTube have very, very robust anti-ad blocking measures to make sure that their ads still get served. There's only so much that Pi-hole can do about this, but it's worth noting that it will still help in other parts of your network, but don't expect absolutely every ad from absolutely every service to be blocked all of the time. Second, there are reasons to allow ads on certain websites. A lot of websites or video media platforms rely on ads to generate revenue, particularly for creators. So if you're particularly fond of an online news website, if you're fond of certain magazines, maybe PC Mag or some game news, or even for your favorite YouTube creators, it might be worth it to allow those ads to show up on that site or on those videos so that the people you are supporting or the companies that you're supporting can earn ad revenue from serving you those ads. So there are some reasons why you might want to allow ads, but if you want to go network wide, you're able to do that. Also worth noting is that you can whitelist certain IP addresses. So if there is a magazine that you want to support by allowing ads when you visit their site, you can enter that into Pi-hole so that you still get ads for just those things, while avoiding ads on sites that you don't want to see them on. I think it's also worth noting that if you want to support certain creators, there are better ways to support them than by just viewing their ads. Whether you subscribe to a magazine or you subscribe to the Patreon or the Premier membership of whatever creator or platform that you want to support, those are better options also. Now, without further ado, let's actually get into setting up Pi-hole. I'm going to be going through this as an Unraid tutorial to get Pi-hole set up on Unraid. Pi-hole is available in basically every operating system under the sun, and it was even originally developed to be so lightweight that you could run it off of just a Raspberry Pi. So you can definitely install this on basically any hardware that you have, but I'm gonna be showing Unraid today. The first thing you're gonna wanna do is go to the Apps tab of Unraid and search for Pi-hole. You'll want to grab the official container from BinHex. So go ahead and click on it and then hit the install button and then wait for the configuration screen to come up. I would recommend renaming this container at the beginning so that you know exactly what it is. Next, you'll want to go to the network type and set it to custom, as we are going to assign a fixed IP address to Pi-hole. The reason we set a fixed IP address for Pi-hole is because we actually route our DNS traffic through Pi-hole, so we don't want that IP address for this container to change when it restarts or gets reassigned an IP address for whatever reason. We want it to stay the exact same all of the time. It is also important that you use an IP address that is not already reserved for another device on your network. In order to check that, you're gonna need to go to your router settings. If you haven't logged into your router's web interface previously, try just going to 192.168.0.1 in a browser and log in. If you need additional help getting into your specific router, there are likely instructions on the device itself. I'm going to heavily censor my router settings and they will look a little bit different for you, but here's the gist of what you need to do to find an open IP address on your network. Find the clients section of your router settings and sift through all of the clients listed there. Simply find an IP address that follows the structure of your currently connected clients, but where the part after the last period is something different than what shows up in the client list. So something like 192.168.0.8 might work for me because it follows the pattern for the first 3 sections, and then that last section is unused. So that's what I'm gonna set as my fixed IP address in the Unraid configuration for Pi-hole. Keep your router settings open though, or at least easily accessible, because we will be revisiting them in the future. Next, make sure that the web interface port is set to a port that is available on your server. If you use a port for Pi-hole that is already in use by another container, it will not work properly. To check this, go ahead and scroll all the way to the bottom of the configuration window and hit the Show Docker Allocations button. Now hit Control F to search and enter in the default port number. If that number is being used by another container, then simply change it to something that is not in use. I usually just increment by 1 until I find an open port. I'm gonna go with 8156. The other ports, DNS, TCP, and DNS UDP, and Network Discovery UDP, should stay the same. It is unlikely that these ports are already in use on other parts of your service, but if they are, I would actually recommend looking at changing the ports on the other containers instead of Pi-hole. These ports tend to be more specific to the use case by Pi-hole. If you need to change the Pi-hole ones though, you can probably get away with it, but you might have to do a little bit more faffing around. The next 2 paths to configure are the Pi-hole config path and the DNS max path. Again, these can stay as their default values to point to your app data share. This just stores configuration information for your containers. In my case, because I already have a Pi-hole instance, I am going to change these paths slightly so that I don't overwrite or conflict with any of my current Pi-hole data. And that is all of the configuration that needs to be done here. So whenever you're ready, go ahead and scroll all the way down and hit the Apply button, and then wait for the container to download and install. Now, Pi-hole is going to generate a password that you will need to use to log in for the first time. So back in the Docker tab, click on the icon for the Pi-hole container that you just made and click on Logs. You may need to wait a moment for all of these logs to populate properly. Toward the top of the log file, you should see something like this. No password set in environment or config file, assigning random password. Copy whatever password was generated and keep that on hand for imminent use. Feel free to skip ahead if you're okay with the already generated password. To set your own password, you want to click on the Pi-hole container icon once again and open the console and then type this command, Pi-hole-A-P, and hit enter. You'll be prompted to create and then confirm the new password. Make sure to hit enter after each step. So as I'm sitting here editing this video, I actually learned that sometimes there's a different command that you need to set a password in Pi-hole. So if the previous command doesn't work for you and it pops up just a list of suggested commands, then you're going to want to do the following. You're still going to click on the icon and go to console, but this time instead of Pi-hole-A-P or whatever it was that I said before, it's Pi-hole set password. And then it will show the option to enter your new password and then confirm it after that. So if you're having issues with the previous method, go ahead and try this one. With your new password set, go ahead and return to the Docker page. While we were on the Docker page here, I would also recommend turning on the auto start toggle so that Pi-hole will automatically spin up if you have to restart your server for some reason. With auto start turned on and your password in hand, now it's time to log into the web interface. Click on the Pi-hole container icon once again, but this time click on Web UI. Enter in your password here and boom, you're right into the UI. Now there are two primary methods to get Pi-hole to actually start blocking ads. You can configure it to work for only specific clients on your network or for the whole network. I will be showing you how to set it up for the whole network, but if you want to do it client by client, just go to the Clients tab in the Pi-hole UI and it will walk you through how to set it up. For our purposes today, we're going to be headed back to our router settings to get things set up for network-wide ad blocking. We do this by setting the IP address of the Pi-hole container as the DNS server that your router uses. This means that all traffic on your network will pass through Pi-hole before it actually resolves. This is how you actually get the ad blocking, as I talked about a little bit earlier in the How Pi-hole Works section. First, go to your router's DHCP settings. This is usually found under some sort of LAN tab or page. Next, search for a setting called DNS server. This is usually set to automatic and uses your internet service providers or ISP's preferred DNS. Instead, switch it to manual and set the primary DNS to the IP address you set for Pi-hole. In my case, that is 192.168.0.8. It is important that you also set the secondary DNS in the event that for some reason your Pi-hole container is down or isn't working, it can fail over and you can still access the internet, albeit with ads. I like to use 1.1.1.1, which is Cloudflare's DNS, which I tend to find being pretty quick and about as secure as you're gonna get with a publicly available DNS like that. And then make sure that you save those settings so they actually take effect. And if you've done everything right, you should be blocking ads on your network right now. Before we go back and check and see if everything's working though, while we're in our router settings, we're also going to make sure that the IP address for Pi-hole is reserved on your network, so that if your network reboots, it doesn't assign a client to that IP address that you had earlier, just to make sure that everything stays reliable and usable across resets, power outages, things like that. So go to the Clients tab in your router settings and look for the IP address of Pi-hole. Again, for me, I'm looking for 192.168.0.8. Once you find it, go to the config and enable fixed IP address. This means that your router won't use that IP address when assigning them to new clients in the future. Again, this just helps make sure that Pi-hole is resilient to restarts and power outages and things like that. Now, to see if Pi-hole is doing its job, we're gonna go back to its web UI and look at the top of the dashboard page. So if you go visit some other sites that you know usually have ads, or really any site, because they all have ads these days, you should see the numbers on this dashboard tick up as far as new queries and results go. That's how you know whether or not Pi-hole is working. Now, there are plenty of other configurations that you can make to Pi-hole. For example, as I mentioned earlier, you can whitelist certain domains if you do want to allow ads for a magazine, for example, that you do want to support. However, that's a little bit out of the scope of this video. There are tons of other great guides about it. Today was just about how to get it set up and working. That wraps up things here. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you learned something and were able to get everything set up. If you did, please consider subscribing for more content like this in the future. And if you're looking for the next thing to self-host, maybe consider watching my video on how to set up Image pretty easily. I'll leave that linked below as well as on the end screen. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.